call to order. We have a new member. Would that member like to identify himself, please? And
Yeah, my name is Randy Pond. I'm the Housing Authority member, and I was sworn in today.
Welcome.
well, welcome.
And here, we've got this pile of stuff here. You can pass that down. These are the applications that we reviewed this year, just so that you have an idea. You can, the work's all been done, so everything's going to warrant articles, but just so you have an idea of what they look like, and, you can't sleep some night.
Okay.
They're good for that.
Right.
We're gonna, there's no one from the general population that is here to speak, and we got David on the old business. So, can I get approval for the minutes of February 8th?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor to approve the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Abstain? One. Under old business, David Spitz, welcome.
Hello again. Shall I tell you where things stand right now?
You have the floor.
Okay. We have gone ahead and prepared the request for proposals. The first draft is done, and I'll tell you a little bit about the scope of services. I won't tell you about all the boilerplate. I don't think you need that, but that'll tell you a little bit about where we're heading. You can decide if it affects your decision or not. I met with the town engineer last week. I'm finishing up the details, and it's going back to him to get in the Central Register and into the Cape Cod Chronicle. And I forget exactly which date in March that is, but the submission date is April 12th. So that means we expect to have all responses to the RFP by April 12th. We're giving 3 weeks for people to respond. It can be 2. We decided to leave a little bit longer. We've left time for a pre-hearing conference at the museum. So, this is not a huge project. There's 30,000 available, as you know. So we could do, it's under 35,000, I think that's the magic number, so we could just seek 3 bids, but we have no idea who we want to do the project. So we're going out to whoever's out there, and we'll find out. So, it's tight. The timeline is tight. If we're seeking submissions by April to get it done, by your applications are due end of September, I believe. Mm-hmm. That's your current date, October 1st or September 30th? So that gives us a tight window to get everything done by then, but that's our goal. And let me quickly tell you what we're doing and then just what our current thinking is. We're focusing primarily on accessibility and on storage needs. We want to be able to use the basement, which is currently old bathrooms and stuff. And we want to get a lift in that'll serve both maybe an elevator, but probably a lift that'll serve both the basement and the second floor. Right now, they have an electric chair. Has anybody used one of those? It's a real pain for them to get people up and down, and that's stuck way in the back. So the previous plans for the elevator would be right in the way of air conditioning or some kind of mechanical equipment that's outside the building right now. So those plans have to be redone. So those are by far and away the main things, figuring out how to get the lift, or based on South Harwich Meeting House, we're pretty sure we can do a lift. But that's the goal. Record storage in the basement, possibly some additional use of the second floor. In addition to those items, we do want the structural adequacy to be checked out. We want the applicant to include a structural engineer. Somebody's always questioning foundation on these older buildings. There's no real credible information that shows it's a problem, but we're going to check it out. There's some things in terms of being a historic building that don't match very well. The Town Public Works Department does a great job of getting things done, but they weren't particularly sensitive to matching floors and stuff like that. So for your purposes, the majority of what we're seeking to do is interior work. If you see it in yourselves to decide not to take the money back yet, that allows us to get started based on any recommendations that come through in approximately September. That allows us to get started in the fall. We can also come back to you and go through your normal cycle and then be able to get going after town meeting day. So it would be a little more than a half a year delay. That's okay, we can live with that. This doesn't have to be done right away. I guess my last pitch will be, if you can see it to, if you need the money now, take it, because we're not doing what we said in 2007, 2008. I can't relate this project to exactly what was outlined then. It would just be too hard for me to prove stuff that somebody else thought about that was done under different thinking with the CPC. All I can do is tell you where we stand now. So we're doing the accessibility, we're doing the records storage, possibly some structural stuff, possibly some historic restoration type of stuff. Optimistically, we could be ready to go on that in the fall. If we wait for your next cycle, I'm pretty confident we would get approved. If we have a pretty clear plan, then we could get going the following spring. Let's see, what else did I miss? I can answer any questions.
Just to bring you up to speed.
Yeah, you got all this, so,
We funded a study for $30,000
Yeah.
back in 2014, I
13, I
think.
believe. Well, maybe it was,
Whatever, doesn't matter.
maybe town meeting was 14.
So it was very specific at the time. They also have some unexpended funds from some prior articles back in 2007, 2008, which basically were for a lot of exterior.
It was about half exterior, half.
It's hard to tell from the applications,
Okay.
but one was completely exterior, another one, whatever, so it's hard to tell. But, so he's referring to the study when he was saying he's putting the RFP out. I think, though, that, well, two things. One, how does what you're proposing in the study fit in under the CPA guidelines in terms of, you mentioned some historical preservation, but how does this fit under the CPA guidelines? Because it really would have to come all under historic
Right.
preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, if it was gonna be funded. And the prior articles, if we really don't have any idea of what still needed to be done or whatever, the money can't be expended for anything else.
Everything related to accessibility is under your guidelines, and that's the biggest part of it. I believe the record storage is too. And certainly if we're taking out components that were not done well and restoring them to be matching the historic look of that would be also. The foundation work, I don't know, I haven't researched that one.
Jim?
Okay, well, my feeling is that we should allow them to continue with the study and, the $30,000 for the study. But that I think it would be a lot cleaner if we called back the funds from the earlier applications and allowed them to come in the fall with new applications based on the information found in the study. Because we're not sure at this point whether the study is going to show that the scope of work that needs to be done is going to correspond with what was applied for in the earlier applications. So I think it would be cleaner if we allowed them to continue with the $30,000 for the study, but we called back the funds from the other applications and allowed them to come in the fall with new applications based on the results of the study.
Mary?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. How much was the other money versus the 30?
One was 50-something thousand left, and the other one had 20-something thousand left, I think. I could look it up for you.
And through you, Mr. Chairman, would the 30 cover your study?
The
So that you'd
30,000
be
is
in-
separate.
So that you'd be in line?
The 30,000 is a
Separate,
separate article
okay.
from those other two.
Well, we actually, in the last meeting,
Right.
discussed them, letting them
Well,
use that money in order to,
no, I think what we said was that money's available
It's
to them.
available.
Right,
But still,
right.
it was nothing's
Yeah,
been
right,
done, so
right,
there's no
right.
issue.
That's right, Kathy.
But let me just look up that for you, Mary. Let's see. If there's 26,000 left from the article in 2007, and there's about 50, close to 54,000, which was specifically for exterior restoration from 2008.
So, through you, my thoughts on the historic restoration, it is a historic building. It certainly would fall under all of the Historic Commission's guidelines for, any demolition would have to go through for the NOI notice, for the notice of intent. I would tend to think, I would personally put any historic funds that were approved into the category like the library. It's, if restoring that building isn't a historic building, then it isn't a proper use of historic funds. I don't know what else would be. So I guess I'd be, if we knew, if we can get a handle on how much was historic restoration, I'd almost be inclined to let that sit, just because once the study's done, if it isn't historic restoration, then they can't use it. If it is, if the study tells them that it is, and it's, exterior renovation, or it's fixing something inside that's restoring the old historic building, then they'd still be able to move forward on it. So, just my 2 cents worth.
I don't,
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the issue is whether it's historic or not. I think that's, as you had mentioned, it's a foregone conclusion because it's a historic building. In my mind, the issue is that the study that is going to go on may develop a scope of work as to what needs to be done that is completely different than the applications that have already been approved.
Yep.
And therefore, it sort of would muddy the water if they were trying to do it with parts of funds from an old application and then coming in with supplemental applications for what couldn't be done. I think it's cleaner if we just bring back the funds from the older applications, except for the $30,000 for the study. And then the study will generate the scope of work of what needs to be done in the future, and that will generate the sort of scope of work for applications which they can clearly submit in the fall.
We'll get to you in 1 second.
do you want me to go?
Yeah, would you let them in? We had an issue with the door locking, so we want to make sure all our members have, go ahead, Kathy, I'm sorry. My apologies, folks.
I'm not debating whether the building is a historic
doesn't know
building.
that.
Yeah, no,
Okay,
and neither am I.
It is, okay, but the question always arises as to the scope of the work that needs to be done, whether it falls under preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, or whether it falls under maintenance, that's another issue. And then, changing sort of, doing work to create storage, does not necessarily equate to historic restoration. I mean, there's just a lot of things to talk about. I personally think that the article that we really haven't been able to get a handle on, the one from 2007, in terms of the specifics, we should rescind. I think the article that has the 50-something thousand left in, that was specifically for exterior, restoration or, work. I mean, I don't have a problem with leaving it on the books in case they get this RFP, they get it completed in time, and in September, they have identified a few things that are gonna need to be done. They can start working on it, because then they'd have to wait another whole cycle till next July
Yeah.
before they would get some funds. I mean, it's obviously gonna have to go through the Historic Commission anyway, so it's not like it wouldn't be appropriate.
Right.
So I'd hate to take away the money to get some things done that they really would fall into the category.
And I guess, Kathy, that's much better phrased than I phrased it. That's what I was trying to get at, is that if there's something that would be appropriate for them to still have money and be able to use after the study, then I'd be more inclined to let them keep that.
Yeah, I mean, I would,
And I understand Jim's point as well. I mean,
Yeah, because-
would it be cleaner? Yes, I get that.
Okay, well then, how are we going to do the accounting based on what they're proposing from the scope of work from the study? How are we going to do the accounting as comparing it to the scope of work for the previous applications?
If I may.
Sure.
Go ahead, David.
I think what I'm trying to suggest is, if you wait, you've managed, I believe, to fund this year's cycle. I believe going to next year's cycle, you'll want to know if this money is part of what you're doing or not. By next September, we will optimistically know what the study has come up with. And then we can see if it sufficiently fits the scope of the 2008 article.
Anybody else? Mary?
Is the you have the 2008 article, you just don't have the 2007 article?
Yeah, but it's not very specific at
It's
all.
not.
And it, yeah, it was
Well, that
very.
means I can use it for anything, right?
But it's specifically, the warrant article specifically says exterior restoration,
Understood.
okay? The 2007 one doesn't, it just says restoration. So
Understood.
that one is a lot less clear, and I wouldn't want to spend those funds on something it wasn't intended for, and I haven't been able to unearth that particular application at all.
Nor have I.
Okay.
David, exterior, you have windows that are 15 by 15 that are in desperate need of restoration. Now, I'm not a restoration expert, but I know that. I know what I see because that's what I do. I have no qualms with holding the, what's 57? Is that what it is?
53.
53?
I think.
And
For
change.
doing any type of exterior restoration that you need. Those windows are in desperate need of repair. That's your call.
Yeah, I'm not a building expert.
I
do know
understand.
that $20,000 was spent on windows. And the balance of 53 or 54 is after that 20,000 was spent. So I'm learning as I go.
Kathy,
Would you like me to read a little bit about what this says? This is all I could find.
just trying to help you down the,
Please.
I'm listening.
Project description. Following the restoration and preservation of the south facade of the Brooks Academy building, it is proposed to carry the preservation work to the exterior side facing Parallel Street on the south side. The program will include restoration of the existing window sash and trim to preserve these critical architectural elements. Restore or replace deteriorated trim at eaves and base of wall. Replacement of the deteriorated and non-functioning storm windows with historically appropriate storm windows. Restoration of lower windows facing the south that have deteriorated the most, and replacement of doors with historically appropriate facing. Restoration of original clapboard siding.
before we go any.
Fairly
Before we
specific.
go any further, I'm gonna
Yeah.
call for a 5-minute recess, please. We're gonna take a 5-minute recess.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Are we off?
are we off?
Only your audio will be off, your video can't be.
Okay.
You can't catch up.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, you're back.
Kathy,
Oh, that was all I was gonna say. You know, it says, "We plan on replacement of enough of the structure that upkeep in the future will be minimal in cost and minimal in internal upkeep, heat, plumbing, et cetera, et cetera." And that project in 2008 was estimated for 75,000. That's where the majority, I think the storm windows came out of that, and there's about 53 or so left in there. So it was very specific.
Yep.
So am I hearing correctly, Kathy, that that only allows the replacement of the storm windows on one side of the building? The south side?
No, it talks about following the restoration of the south side. They want to do work on the, yeah, see, following the restoration of the south facade is proposed to carry the preservation work to the exterior side facing Parallel Street, which
the
it says is the
side.
south side.
Yeah. So this is.
that would be east.
No,
Parallel
I mean,
Parallel
it,
Street is
Parallel
south.
is the south side.
okay, so I don't quite understand that's the
Yeah,
wording.
And that goes really to my concern that, you know, basically what the scope of work of the existing articles that were approved, you know, 2007, 2008, you know, may not be exactly what the museum needs, decides it needs to do as a result of the study.
Well, all I'm saying is, some of it may be.
Some of
And
it
some
may
of
be,
it
and
we
some
may
of
be
it,
able-
and some of it.
And we can present that more clearly in September.
With the study.
Yeah, and I think it just makes a very confusing accounting process, going back into the various scopes that come out of your study, plus the scopes of the other, and sort of developing, a hybrid that, uses multiple sources of funding. Now, it's not impossible, but I think it would be much cleaner if we just called back or rescinded those applications or those funds, and then had them come in with, requests based on the results of the study that's going to proceed.
Kathy?
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion. I mean, I kind of have to lean with Jim here because there's another application. I found two applications for the same thing, okay? Written by the same person. This one says, preserve historic exterior Brooks Academy building by removing the vinyl siding from the west facade of the original building and the north and west facades of the addition wing. And then it talks about the windows, blah, 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 and then it says restoration of the lower windows facing the west that have deteriorated the most, and the restoration of the original clapboard siding. So it's kind of like, I mean, I'm not really sure.
One could have been the 2007, one could have been the
It could have, the
2008.
dates, though, are not that way,
Really?
but it's, yes, it's too hard to tell.
Understood.
I know.
No, it's frustrating.
That was in that box of goodies, though,
I am sure.
I have to bring back.
Joe?
So she did have one.
She did have one.
You did have one.
Trying anything?
Well, I think I'll take a time to catch up a little bit on it.
Okay, no problem. No problem. David?
No, I don't have anything more.
Okay. What's the board's? Yep. What's the board's pleasure?
What do you think? Do you have an opinion?
I like the idea of leaving the 53,000 there for the exterior, just based on my observations of what I saw. I don't understand the orientation of the building, apparently, because it looks like the damage that I see in those windows is on the east side. But,
Every side could be needing work.
well,
Right.
it seems that the west, what I would call the west side and the front entryway were taken care of. So that's access from the parking lot walking into the building. Go ahead, Kathy.
All right, I'm gonna make a motion to rescind the remaining funds left over in the article from 2007.
Which totals,
Which totals, I don't have the exact amount, but it was article number 41. It's approximately 26,000. I don't know the exact number.
Okay, and I'll second that motion.
okay, there's been a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any more discussion? All those in favor of the motion?
Hi.
Aye.
Hold on, who voted no? Anybody?
No, it was unanimous.
Okay.
One abstention?
No, I've voted in favor.
Okay.
Quick learner.
All right, so, Jim,
Okay, David, I would also like to make a motion to rescind the funds from, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Kathy, the 2008 application, in the amount of, is it 53,000?
Approximately.
Approximately $53,000.
I'll give you the article number.
Okay,
It's article number 30.
okay, rescind the funds from article number 30, in the amount of approximately $53,000.
is there a second? Okay, motion doesn't carry. As it stands right now, they have the 53,000, is that correct?
Yes, and I think that the understanding is that it would be used
Used
for
the exterior?
historic
His-
exterior
Mhm.
restoration.
That's very fair.
So,
So
Right.
that's That's it, you have our blessing,
Okay, thank you.
and please keep us posted.
I've been at very many votes where Jim's been on the one side.
Sorry about that, David.
That's okay.
That's all right, we'll still be friends.
Okay, good.
Did I?
Thank you for coming, David.
When I ran down to get the door for Joe, just as I came in, you were talking about that the project has to come before.
As you know me, usually.
Right, so any warrant of this would have to come before the
I know.
commission. Is that, did
I
I
just
miss
don't-
anything else? Okay, good.
Okay, now we're on to new business.
They've got somebody at the head like
Reports
that
from
versus
the
rudderless.
neighboring towns, community preservation policies and protocols. I guess we can have a discussion.
Okay,
Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Go ahead, Kathy's all fired up.
No, I'm not. Well, couple things. One, I'm not sure how much we want to discuss, given that Dan's not here, and Dan is sort of, Dan is another one of our members who's sort of spearheading the revamping of our application, our selection criteria, that kind of thing, along with us starting to have a discussion about specific policies and procedures that we might want to put in writing. And all that would come under a comprehensive plan, a community preservation plan, which we don't have. So what we decided to do was, we decided to each take a town and see what they had. So I had the town of Brewster, and I communicated with the chairperson of their CPC committee. And interestingly enough, they do not write a plan. They do not have a plan. They do have an annual public hearing, because that's required by law, but they review the priorities in their application every year to update them if they feel like they need to be updated. And they use a recent housing production plan and a recent open space and recreation plan to guide them versus having their own plan. Okay, that being said, the application was, I thought, well done. There are lots of things that we can, maybe we would want to put together a spreadsheet at one point and, put ideas that came out from various applications and decide if we want to use those or not. But one of the things that they had was, they have 2 meetings in Brewster. They have a special town meeting and a general meeting, and I guess they must have them every single year, because they allow applications, they have 2 application dates, one to be submitted for one the other, which gives sort of a little bit more flexibility in terms of application funding. It's not just a singular cycle. Also, for their historic preservation projects, they require a proof of listing on the State Register of Historic Places or a letter from the commission to be submitted with the application, at the time of the application. And if they don't meet certain criteria in the application, they don't accept the application. So again, it's just sort of getting your ducks in a row beforehand, and I think we've been a little bit remiss in that. We've gotten better, but, we're still taking things on the fly. Let me see. They have a CD or a thumb drive submitted with the applications, which I thought was kind of interesting. What else was more interesting? They do have a time frame, 2 years. The money needs to be expended within 2 years. They also appoint one of its members as a liaison for each approved project. And that person is in contact with the, application project managers and provide regular reports to the committee. They also provide any initial approval for the project. 2 sets of bills have to be submitted, one for their administrative clerk and one for the town accountant. They both have to be signed and initialed, just in terms of their process. So it's a little bit more specific. And I found that their website was, you could go on their website and you could look up every single application that was submitted. is online, which is kind of a nice thing. I know it requires somebody to scan the applications, et cetera, but it was a nice feature. So, that's it.
Very well, you did your homework.
Yeah, did my homework.
Next.
Okay, well, I have the town of Chatham, and I did make contact with the town of Chatham and found out that they do not have a community preservation plan. They also do not have a written policy statement for the Community Preservation Committee. Viewing that, I got in contact with the chairman of the Community Preservation Committee and asked if it was possible to actually meet with them to sort of go over how they operate, what some of their procedures are, what some of their issues are. Unfortunately, that meeting was not able to be scheduled before tonight's meeting, but it is scheduled for Thursday of next week. So I will have more to report at our next meeting.
Very good. Thank you. Mary?
So I have the town of Dennis. What I did do, and I'm gonna give to Jan so that she can give everybody a copy so that you can see what they do, is they too have everything on their website. So they listed the last 2 years' worth of applications, the last 2 years' worth of awards. They also have a application criteria which lists different selection criteria that they will rely on for each of the categories. It doesn't sound like it's as detailed perhaps as Brewster's was. They do have a grant application timetable, which I thought was interesting. Their deadline is May 5th. So they're working on a kind of a flip-flop to us.
When is their town meeting?
I don't know, so it's probably why. But they have their timetable starts with a public hearing in March, an annual town meeting in May, actually. So there's this for 2017 says May 2nd is their annual town meeting, a CPC budget presentation, and then May 5th is their application deadline. And then May 18th, they start the review process. So it's almost like they start the review process immediately after town meeting for the next
Whew, that's
cycle.
That's a long year.
It is. It is. So in addition to that, and it may be because they too do list, reference a special town meeting. They then have the application online with how they want their application set up. They want a synopsis. I did think it was interesting that they require applications be modified or amended in writing, and otherwise they don't take modifications for them. And it has to be modified in writing prior to the application deadline. So unlike people modifying it during, which I think has been our practice, is to, let people get a space holder, it doesn't seem that they do that. I have not touched base with somebody actually on the commission that is on my follow-up to-do list. So I did want to follow up on that in particular. But in addition to that, they had their award letters. So they did have a set of the 2017 award letters. So, and it says specifically it's not a contract, but here's your award letter. So for example, there was a grant award for year 2 of an affordable housing coordinator addressed to the town planner. At the October 17th special town meeting, the town voted to approve Article 1, which was $11,800 grant from the Community Preservation Affordable Housing Reserve Funds for the purpose of funding the Affordable Housing Coordinator position through June 30th of 2018. And then, references that it's subject to specific terms and conditions, et cetera. And there is an award letter for each application. So an additional follow-up for me is, particularly because of the reference that it's not a contract, my question is whether they follow up any with contracts in addition to that. But I thought that was interesting. And the nice part was it was all available. And to your point, the applications are hyperlinked. You can look at the 2016 applications. You can look at the 2017 applications. So I don't know whether that's a new process for them, and that's why they only go back 2 years, or if they intentionally purge them. But I thought that those might be interesting for people can just see, so I will leave those for Jan so that we can
Do they have a
circulate
plan?
them. I don't believe they do have a plan. There's nothing that even remotely references a plan, and like I said,
Yeah,
I
this is
haven't
all good.
confirmed with anybody.
Hang on now, you haven't heard from everybody.
Again, I haven't confirmed it. I would have hoped that if, where everything else was easily, readily available and at your fingertips, that wasn't. So,
Yeah.
that too is a follow-up, but.
I'm gonna chime in because mine's short. I had a long discussion with the town planner up in Eastham, and apparently he's the coordinator for everything that's CPC there. They sent out an RFP to put their plan together. They don't have one. So, I'm just waiting for some time with him to sit down and talk to him. He's gonna give me all what the numbers are, and he's gonna give me copies of their plan. What they perceive to have in documentation, and what the recommendations are gonna be from whomever, whatever firm that they're hiring. So, Joe.
So did you know we just went alphabetically? And I'm gonna change that a little bit. So I traveled far, but I was going to work anyway, so it worked out. And I was very fortunate because the CPC coordinator for the town of Wellfleet, a colleague of mine and a fantastic person, is also the coordinator for Truro. So, which I didn't realize when I was speaking to her, and she said, "Oh, I can get all that information for you." So I have both Wellfleet and Truro, and this amazing plan is Truro's. So I'm going to talk about Wellfleet first. So it is remarkable. So Wellfleet does not have an official plan either, but the documents they gave me, they are extensive and they're great to go through. When I went through it, their schedule is, I believe, similar to ours, but their deadline for final submissions for the annual town meeting is November 15th, and they had a date, and if there is a special, we consider them, it would be July 15th, because our specials tend to be in the fall. Excuse me. Within the packet, though, that she gave me, there are sample contracts, model agreements, grant statements, and things like that. So it was a lot of great information. And their policies and procedures, it's a 3-page document, but it's very clear, easy to understand and follow. At least it was for me, and that says a lot. And their application is very well formatted, I think. However, I can't hide my disappointment that the neighboring community has this remarkable document. So this is the Town of Truro Community Preservation Plan. And this particular plan is the most current one, most recently amended by them in August of 2015. And so that's the plan itself. And when you look at it, it's a full recitation of the Community Preservation Act, so they're putting it right there. But then they get into specifics of, these are proposals that have been funded before, this is the process and procedure that we do. So it lays everything out in the plan itself, including all of the model documents, the sample documents, the application. Everything's in there. So it's really a full document in that they talk about what they want their plan to be, what they look for the town of Truro, what their criteria tend to be, as well as prior examples. And so for me, when they give this to prospective applicants, they have everything they need right there in the document itself. And I believe for both towns, Mary did say that she does have it accessible on a website and by email.
Kathy?
Well, just a question. So, I mean, they wouldn't be giving the plan, though, to applicants. They would be giving whatever the guts were that applied to the
Right, they keep the plan documents separate, so the application, the
Right.
procedures and
So-
all that.
so-
But if people wanted, they do
Then,
have.
of course, it's
yeah.
available, it's a
Yeah.
public document, but, so the plan itself, does it, does it have a needs analysis that they, did with the public? Okay, I'm not saying, did you read it or anything?
Yeah,
I'm
so-
just saying, because, I mean, that's the part of where our thing was coming from, was that, the need to be, whether the need was for us to be more proactive versus reactive. Was the public hearing enough to just hear what was needed in the moment, or are we supposed to be doing more of a needs analysis, et cetera, et cetera? And so I think that's sort of what we were looking for in the plan.
This is what I'm confused at, because I listened to Jim's argument at the last meeting. When you talk about proactive and reactive, being proactive would be gathering the information for ourselves, making our determination on what we think the town's needs are, and acting on it. Being reactive would be bringing the people from the town in, listening to their arguments, and then acting on that. Am I incorrect?
Yeah.
All right, then explain it to me, because I don't understand
Okay,
it.
well, I think I'm the cause of your confusion, David. I'll try to explain it to you.
I didn't
Oh,
mean to
better
single
you
you
than
out.
me.
That's perfectly all right, and, since I do have a planning degree, maybe, but anyway, you're sort of, I think you're talking about both the document or the end result and the process. Because basically, the plan should be sort of a concept of what we feel the community's needs are for the use of community preservation funds. Now, however, the process of obtaining that needs to be through an open process where we would hold open meetings, or whether you want to call them hearings. I'd rather not have them formal public hearings, but open meetings with representatives of various communities within the town and various sections of the town to get input as to what those needs really are. Now, that's how you develop a quote-unquote plan. What Joe, to me, it described is in Toro's plan, to me sounded much more like a policy statement than a plan, because a plan would look forward and say, well, to give you an example, we need to preserve certain historic features of the community, whether they be the museum that we talked about today, the library, Alborough House, or whatever. But we need to, sort of prioritize projects that are going to look at certain things that we feel are needed in the community that fit under the auspices of the availability of funds under the Community Preservation Act. And it's a kind of a hard thing to get at. I mean, on the planning board, we're going to be starting a process to sort of take a look at the comprehensive plan for the entire town. And the community preservation plan should really be a component of that, just like the housing plan should be a component, the recreational and open space plan should be a component. And one of the most difficult things that I think we're going to have, difficult problems we're going to have to get at is, what did the residents of Harwich want Harwich to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, and then how do we get there?
I hate that crystal ball.
Well, and again, it's sort of not a crystal ball, it's sort of making a determination based on the best information you have at any one point in time. Now, that's why plans are updated on a regular basis, because things change, and maybe you thought you wanted to go one way and you start going down that road and you get the sense that that's not really the way we should be going. So when you revise the plan, then you make those types of revisions. Now, the community preservation plan, I think, is a little bit harder to get at, because what we're looking at is the needs of the community in certain specific areas that are eligible for funding under the Community Preservation Act. And we're doing that sort of more sort of abstract, as opposed to waiting for applications to come in. And then I think if we were to get a plan and we were to get something that was agreed to by both this committee and the selectmen and whoever else we feel needed to approve it, then what we do is either we actively solicit applications to implement that plan, or we base our priorities on that plan in evaluating applications that come in. I don't think we want to restrict it one way or the other.
Joe.
Does that help, David? Probably not.
So I didn't use that opportunity to read the plan. But I was reminded,
I can try it again, Joe.
no, I had plenty of time, thank you.
Okay.
Because as you were saying that, so, and to be fair to Truro, because I don't want to misrepresent what they have, but actually what you described is what they do have in their plan. I think it would match what you're describing as a
Okay.
plan. So
Well,
what
good.
they've done is they do lay it out in these various sections. They talk about the act generally, then they talk about Truro and how, and their procedures of how an applicant would go through the process. And then, starting on their section 5, their sections 5, 6, and 7 are a description of the goals related to historic preservation, open space, and affordable housing. And then the footnote on that says exactly that. This 2015 plan, so as most recently amended in August of 15, has a footnote saying that the goals that are articulated under historic preservation, open space, and affordable housing were culled from their 2005 local comprehensive plan. So when you read that, they tie it back to that, and they articulate the goals of each of those and what they would expect applicants to zero in on. So I do think it gets to what you were describing, more than what I've seen in Wellfleet and other places that I'm familiar with.
Okay, well, then that would be valuable, I think, for us all
Yeah.
to take a look at.
The only thing I would add, though, is it just strikes me that they've got the 2005 local comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
They've got the August of 2015 community preservation plan. And I know some municipalities reevaluate their comprehensive plans every decade or so. But
By state
It's-
law, they're supposed to.
that, yeah, try.
Yeah,
Again, I'm not speaking of any particular community.
No.
But we've struggled with that, meaning trying to get it done and get all the forces together. But even this has reached a point where there might be a little bit of a disconnect. The goals that were articulated a decade ago are still reflected in their plan. If they've done their local comprehensive plan 10 years later, it's not yet reflected. So there is, a lot of work went into it, but I think to your point, yeah, to marry those two documents is going to require everyone pitching in on many levels.
Great, and, David?
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, not to continue for too long, but, I mean, Joe has brought up a very good point. The issue that we're going to have is that I think we need to proceed as quickly as possible with the community preservation plan once we sort of decide what that is and how we're going to go about forming it. The planning board and the town planner have talked extensively about the process to develop a town-wide comprehensive plan. We have a comprehensive plan which, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, is 2011?
Thought it was 12, but right around that time.
Okay, right around that time, it's the most recent. Having reviewed that, and I think in people I talked to, in the majority here, none of us believe that's a comprehensive plan. It basically is like a strategic plan for the organization of a private corporation. And that was developed by the planning board at that time, and I think it reflected both the sort of orientation and the backgrounds of the planning board members at that time. We have made a request, or the planning board and the planning department has made a request for funds to hire a consultant in order to assist the planning board and the planning department in putting together a comprehensive plan, because it is a fairly major effort. And right now, you know, we have one person in the planning department, and we can get some additional help from members of the planning board, but you really need a little bit more effort than that to put together the type of comprehensive plan which I think we've all agree we need to start looking at. Unfortunately, the funding for that has been delayed for at least a year, and was not approved and is not in the budget that's going to town meeting this spring. We may try to start sort of brainstorming about how we want to structure that type of plan before we get the funding in order to hire a consultant. But the major effort on a comprehensive plan is at least I would say at least a year and a half to 2 years away before we can even start work. And then the effort is normally, I would say, a 2 to 3 year effort. So while all the comments that were made and the comments you made, Joe, are correct, we need to sort of be in the context of a town-wide comprehensive plan. I feel that the timing is such that we need to sort of proceed and do the best we can based on what information we know. We do have a recently approved housing plan for the town. We have a recently approved open space and recreational plan for the
Right.
town, which in my mind are two of the major components of a comprehensive plan. So we do have some information, but I think we need to get started and realize that, you know, this needs to be an input and work interactively with the comprehensive planning process for the entire town. And even if we adopt it in a year, year and a half, it may be subject to change as we proceed.
Mary?
And just a comment, even though we don't have anything that covers historic, we certainly do have bylaws. We have the demolition delay bylaw that's based on 100-year-old homes. We have certainly a historic district, and we have significant interest in the campground as well, plus the old captain's houses. So there's always those things as well that we can look to on those, on that piece as well.
Jim?
On that, don't we also have an inventory, Mary?
We do. We do. We have a list that yes.
Yeah, I know.
That you folks have the 4-volume set of. So yes, we do
So
have.
we don't have to
do have a list.
incorporate the whole thing in the plan.
No,
We could just
exactly.
do a reference. Yeah.
Exactly. We do have that list that is fairly comprehensive on the properties that are on the list.
All right, before we go any further, I understand where you folks are coming from, I think. But I look at things a little bit differently. I was listening to the words construct used, and I was looking at one of the applications that Bob McCready grabbed from Concord. And for example, as an outline, to start, an overview. The Community Preservation Act in the town of Harwich, introduction, overview, how CPC funds can use, needs assessments, community housing, how historic preservation, open space recreation, general section criteria, guidelines for submission, funding, allowable spending purposes, standard application procedures, applications, requirements and attachments, special application processes, CPC funding processes, reimbursement processes, closing processes, and a whole bunch of appendages on different policies, bylaws, statute, annual reports, certified town meeting votes, Interior Secretary and Interior standards and requirements, historic properties. There's a ton of information here for guidelines for an outline. Kathy?
And that's great, but that's all like sort of more policy and procedures. It's not necessarily a plan. I
But
think what,
isn't this the starting point?
well, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's a supplement.
David, I agree with Kathy, that's more policy and procedures, which can be part of a plan. It doesn't have to be a separate document. It can be part of what we call the plan, but it's not all of what we call.
Oh, I'm not saying it's all, but it's a starting point.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, there's graphs for the town of Harwich in here. Bob spent a lot of time, as I go through this, refining this, placing Harwich's criteria in this mold. So I'm just saying, there's an outline here for all of us to look at.
David?
Joe?
I think we're all saying the same thing. I think what you have there is a roadmap or a model to dive into the policies and procedures part of it. And as Jim and others have mentioned, we have components of the vision statements that may, for lack of a better phrase, that may have been articulated already on open space, historic, whatever the case may be. And it's the melding of those two things together, because that's what you see with the Truro plan. So, yes, I think we have our starting points. I think we have enough to begin with,
That's what I'm looking for.
and I think we need to color in the lines as we go. But I do think both sides of both ledger columns are met.
All right, based on what Jim just said about the comprehensive plan, missing particular whatever, how does that fit this construct? If you don't have information that you can reliably lean on and construct into this, how does that work? I don't understand it. They're saying that the comprehensive plan isn't complete, or it's going to be changed based on a particular point of view that was given from a particular point in time. That changes. So, do we wait for that change to happen, or do we formulate what we need to formulate and go forward with a?
We do in my opinion, we do the latter, and because when the comprehensive plan changes, then we just modify the pages that deal with that. To me, and I apologize if I missed it from the last meeting, but a community preservation plan should be a vision of the goals that the town wishes to accomplish relative to the allowed areas that we can draw upon from existing documents that may include comprehensive plan, as well as specific policies, procedures, and all the annotations that go with it. And if we begin that effort now, when the comprehensive plan is updated, just by the very nature of the comprehensive plan, there's commentary from that we can then bring back to our plan. I don't know if I said that the right way, but.
Mary?
Just quickly, I think if we have it in place, then when the planning board and the planner are putting together the comprehensive plan, they'll have something to look at, and they're either gonna agree or disagree, and it's gonna be revised accordingly. So then once the local comprehensive plan is in place, which is the overarching document that we're required to do, that governs everything,
Right.
then
Okay.
we'll each of our boards will be charged with amending our pieces of it to comply with the local comprehensive plan, if that makes sense.
Kathy?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So part of a plan might include something like, if we know, for example, that one of the charges of the HDHC is to expand the historic district, let's just say. And so then we might take a goal of something having to do that, and we would write that into our plan. Or, for example, supporting the housing production plan, if they had a goal of increasing affordable housing by 3%, we might say, with CPC funding, or with CPA funding, we would want to work towards a 2% goal, or something like that. So, kind of specific goals.
Absolutely. That's the plan.
Okay.
Yep.
Jim? I'm sorry, I wanted to make sure everybody got it.
I know, I
you
don't want to
doing, Randy?
completely doubt it. And actually, I'm going to throw out something that might help a little bit. Because I kind of agree with what Joe said and what Kathy said and what Mary said and all, and I think we're sort of brainstorming in the right direction here. One thing that might help, since in my opinion and most of the people I talk to, the comprehensive plan for this town from 2011 isn't a comprehensive plan. I also recently have reviewed the comprehensive plan from 2002, which is more what I would consider a comprehensive plan. And I would say a large percentage of the goals and objectives and sort of implementation goals from that plan are still valid today.
Okay. Go ahead.
One last thing. I
No,
think
it's good.
part of the problem has always been sort of, where do you start, and who's gonna start it? Because, we're a volunteer group, and, we put in a lot of time already in the last, 4 months. No, I'm just saying, we have.
Yeah.
And so, it's a huge undertaking to, put together something like this the right way. And I think that we sort of get stalled. So, you know, perhaps we want to take, you know, like a part and work on a part and then, you know, work on other parts. I don't know.
Jim?
Okay, well, if you remember, I can't remember whether it was last year or the year before. It may have been the year before, my first year on this committee. We were in the process of interviewing a consultant to help us, and I think when we reviewed that consultant's scope of work and what they were proposing to do, we weren't satisfied with it. When I know Bob and I had a telephone interview with a consultant who refused to come to Harwich in order to be interviewed, and the telephone interview did not go well.
I remember
And-
that.
And at that point, we decided to sort of back off from hiring that consultant. My recollection was that we were talking about approximately $100,000 worth of funding.
No, it was like 25,000 is
Oh,
what.
was it?
It was 25,000 that we
okay.
budgeted.
Maybe I'm talking about planning board. Okay, well, a certain amount, even if it's only $25,000, if that type of funds is available, you know, we may be able to get some outside help that would be able to work with us. And, you know, basically with us being the lead and doing all the brainstorming and the discussions, help us sort of structure and put together a plan.
Well, that's something that I wish Dan was here tonight, because I essentially tasked Dan to start that process. Again, if East Tim has got its numbers in, they were willing to share a copy of that information with us.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, so that might be a starting point too.
Churros sounds like a good one, too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'd love to read that.
Yeah, I would look.
It's all
to
yours,
read it.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, David, is there any way that we can get, you know, like a copy made of the Torah so that more than one of us could sort of review it before the next meeting? Can we get that done through the town?
Yeah, you just want me to make copies.
Make copies
Right.
and,
Then,
okay,
what? How were you,
well, I mean, I think,
Get 'em?
you know, something like that, I don't want to put you through the process of mailing out. If the copies were made and they were available, maybe through the town planner's office, you know, those of us who were interested could come in and pick up a copy.
Actually, quite frankly, if you were willing to make the copies for us, put the copies, make a set for everyone, put them on Sandy's desk in the morning, or when you get them done, give me a phone call.
There's a
No.
lot,
No
this is
way.
50 pages.
yeah, that's a heck of a
Wow,
lot of
that's a
copies.
lot of,
The town administration office, sorry, Beth
Go ahead.
Postrella said, the town administration office has a swank scanner. So if I asked Sandy if I could use it, then I could scan it.
And we can open it up online, is what you're saying.
I don't know, 50 pages, that's a huge
That's a
document.
big download.
And
I all of a
for
sudden got
doc-
scared.
For documents like this, personally, I like to review it in hard copy,
Okay.
so I would need a printout copy,
Well,
because I make notes.
well, why
and-
It's a
not
bit-
make
What if
you,
we made like just a couple of these
Yeah,
and pass them around?
Yeah, I think if you look,
Whatever works.
there's nothing in the appendices, I think, that we would have to duplicate. It's specific to Truro.
Okay.
Okay.
Really, it's the overview of their procedures as a comparison, and then how they've articulated the goals related to the three main areas.
Right, I mean, we don't need
see,
to.
Probably-
I'd like to compare it to what I have.
Sure,
we-
it's
we don't
probably
need to
15
reprint
pages.
all the pictures and.
Right.
No, we don't need to, I think Joe's right, we don't need to redo the stuff that's specific to Toro. I mean, it's the concepts, the goals,
Yeah.
the operating procedures and
You just
things
want
of
the
that
text.
nature
Yeah, but-
that would be helpful.
All right, let me ask the question, Jan, do you have the ability to identify that?
I don't know, I have,
So-
until I
or
see
does
it.
it take a planner to,
I mean, I'd be happy to look through it and then identify what I think, you know, would be helpful for all of us to look at.
how about that then?
Yeah,
Is
absolutely.
that okay with you?
Yeah,
Because if
no,
you
I'll-
leave out the appendices, it's only 8 pages.
Yeah, and so 8 pages, you know,
Different
we
from
may
50.
be,
It's like my college reports.
There you go.
These footnotes.
I don't know if that has everything we need in these first 8
Yeah, you
pages,
see-
but,
Those
But
binder
again,
separators
if
add a
you-
lot of
If you
pages.
can do that in hard copy
Yeah,
for everybody, and ask on the table inside the administration office on the right, just leave it there, then those of us that pass through can pick up a copy and we'll get you a copy some way, somehow. You don't need it, you've already read the information.
I got
How many
somebody.
pages do you have?
What I would do is I was also
10, 15?
Yeah, probably about, I'll
Okay.
get it 15.
the page that lists all
And
the
I think
appendix,
there's also
so
a
we
copy.
know
Yes,
what
so
they
that we
have
have
in there.
what the
Oh,
appendices
no,
are.
no.
No,
I was
I'd be
thinking
happy to do
scanning
that.
At that
Yeah.
point, no,
Yeah.
I
Thank
have
you.
that copy or.
No, I'll be
in the
happy to do
I
that.
mean,
And
on this, I would say,
David, I did want to make one
I
additional
printed
comment
all
about,
the
One
letters, so
might be
probably
sufficient.
one or two,
plan
you
that
know,
you
so
were
you
Yeah,
can see they are.
well, let's just use.
and not to be critical of it,
Judgment.
but the editing on that was not as detailed as I would have expected. There are facts and all that are attributed to the town of Harwich in that version that you're looking at that come directly from the town of Concord.
Okay, so,
So
I got
wouldn't,
it.
I wouldn't rely on it for anything but sort of the format, the sort of more general discussions.
okay, all
Okay?
right. Because it's pretty,
It's very detailed, but
Yeah,
the
it is.
the details are all town of Concord
well, it's in the double,
details.
right, right.
Okay? So the general discussions and the goals and things of that nature, yeah, fine, but not the details.
It's interesting though,
Why don't you hang
Jim.
on to Wellfleet?
It's got,
What's that?
Why don't you hang on to Wellfleet?
Oh, all right.
it's got our website, www.howardma.gov, pages, Howard MA CPC Index.
Yeah, and that's
All that
Concord.
information's there.
No, that's Concord,
That's Concord.
yes. I checked.
You could have just done somebody could have
An
just done a
overlay.
global,
It was
a global Concord
Okay,
to
there
Harwich.
we go.
Exactly,
And
which is what
that's-
happened, I told you that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it
Alright.
was a global search. you know,
Exactly.
And Concord's
replacing
website is probably
Concord
exactly
with
like ours.
Concord, Harwich.
Because
I
most
find-
of them
Find
are.
and replace.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, there's
Exactly.
another word for that, but,
Yeah, whatever, unless we're being
Right,
videotaped,
right.
let's not get into too much detail.
okay.
So just to go back on it, what do you want me to do? Got the copies, Mary's,
Right,
put them in Sandy's office.
yeah, on the right-hand side, that big table that's on the right, you can leave the copies there, I'll talk to
I'll
Sandy
just
in the morning.
get one of these gift gobs, and I'll just stick it and say
What are you
Dennis.
copying?
Dennis's info that
Dennis's.
Mary
If you want,
had.
if you want Dennis's info, that's up to
I
you
don't know
folks.
if we should recopy everything right now, I think it's too.
no,
Okay.
I think
I'll let you
right
hold
now,
on to
the
that.
only
No,
thing
no, I'm
we
gonna
should
give it to you
copy is
for
the
the minutes, you
Truro
can just keep it.
information.
Oh,
So
thank
you can
you.
hang on to it.
That's up to the pleasure of the board, if that's,
So for the record, I win.
Yep.
yeah, you
You
won.
did.
Yeah,
Ding, 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 ding.
Star for today.
Nice job,
Okay.
go.
Not that we're competing, but I won.
So at this point, I'm not making
Yeah.
any.
You don't have to
And
make any copies
That's
at this
fine.
point. Okay.
Yeah, I'd
Okay,
just like to read
so
Turo's.
I'll go through, identify the pages, you want me to get the copies made?
At least for me, please.
Yeah, well, I can get copies made and either put it on Sandy's desk or
Not Sandy's desk.
or,
Put it on the desk in the office on the right-hand side, and then
Okay.
we can go in and get them as we need them.
yeah, the other option I may take a look at, because that may help me to get the copies done, is to have it on Charlene's, the town planner,
Okay,
okay? And have it available through the town planning office.
No.
That might be easier.
okay.
Okay, so if you can just send us a text to when they're
Just let us
available,
know.
and
Yeah.
next time we're here.
Do I have everybody's?
It should be on that.
I think we need Mr. Pond's email address.
Yeah.
Well-
I
I'll send
think-
a new contact
Send a new
list
one?
out
Yeah,
Yeah, why
with-
don't, if
with
you.
Randy's info on it. I did
Okay.
recently, y'all
Yeah,
had
no, I know
one,
you
and I'll
did, I
just
remember
do it
it.
again.
update it.
Yep,
And I'll
Okay.
just, so it's that one page.
right.
Yeah, right. Okay. I can do that, and I'll try to get that done definitely next week.
Okay, so.
Thank you.
Start.
And I'll also have, by the next meeting, I'll have the information, whatever information I can get out of Chatham. Today has been very helpful in helping me form questions I'm going to ask Chatham.
Good.
Are there any other discussions under this right now? Do we pretty much have a plan going forward?
We have a plan to get a plan
We have a plan for a plan.
from the planners.
Okay, let's move on. Next day for our next meeting, May 10th.
Town meeting is that week.
Town meeting's that week.
Well, we have April coming next.
Aren't we going
Oh,
to
yeah,
have an April meeting, David?
Yeah, April.
I forget about April. Dan, there's a particular reason why, and I'm not gonna discuss it.
There's
We won't
April.
ask.
All right, so,
But May 10th, we want to talk about a different time.
okay, all right. So April's meeting is,
The 12th at 6 PM.
Wow, it's early. 12th.
okay, let's discuss May 10th. The question about that is that the night of town meeting?
No, conflict with planning, which Mary and.
Yeah,
Oh,
because-
we have two members that
Conflicting.
are,
I think it's both. It's town, because town meeting is generally 2 nights.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it's not,
Mary-
it's always Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah, but the planning board usually has to be in session during town meeting.
Right,
So we convene just prior to town meeting
right.
and open our meeting and then close at the end of town meeting. And we don't usually have another meeting that same week.
No, correct. I'm not worried about that. I was saying if it's the same week, is
It's
it?
not, it's the following.
It's the week after.
No, 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 no.
May
Town meeting is
10th.
late this week,
Yeah,
this
oh,
year.
okay.
It's May 7th, I think. Is that the Monday?
I'm gonna look it up right
Isn't it?
now.
Yes, correct. Thank
Oh,
you,
Okay.
thank you.
Well, this is based on the calendar that you said you had a conflict, that you
Oh,
have a
okay.
meeting scheduled on the 10th at
Yeah,
6:30.
and we've probably scheduled and maybe even reserved a room for that meeting.
Right.
But we don't normally have a meeting, so we'll have to check. Let me make a note. I'll check with Charlene on that.
So we're not changing anything at this point.
Not this point. I'll check with
the 10th is on a
Charlene
Tuesday. Yep.
before our April meeting.
When's town meeting?
It's the
Town,
7th.
town
So that's
meeting,
Monday.
Monday, right,
That's Monday.
right, our meeting's not
10th's
till
on
the
a
10th.
Thursday, right.
our town meeting is Monday, May 7th
8th.
7th
and
and 8th.
8th. Our annual town election is Tuesday, the 15th. And I'm just trying to call up planning board.
So we're still good for the 10th then?
For now, let me check
Okay, all right.
with Charlene on the planning board schedule. Because I think we are scheduled for a meeting on the 10th, but normally we don't usually have another meeting on the week of town meeting.
Okay, so, next meeting, we got that all set. The agenda points for next meeting? Kathy?
Am I able to bring up that thing I needed to bring up?
Yeah, because I can't, I didn't know about it ahead of time.
Well, let me just ask Joe. I have a request for the release of some funds of, something. Is that okay to bring up?
So if it's a topic that the chair did not reasonably anticipate, we can discuss it. And then the AG's office advisory would be that we confirm it at a future meeting.
Okay.
So we can certainly get into a discussion,
Okay,
but if there's going to be substantive action, we may want to continue it
Okay,
if that's possible.
okay,
But it's certainly something that can be discussed right now.
okay. May I have the floor?
you got the floor.
Okay, so for those of you that haven't been on the committee as many years as some of us, there was a warrant article that was passed back in 2012, I believe, town meeting, that authorized $50,000 for the use of CPA funds for tax title research for like owners unknown properties, et cetera. And the money just sat there because there was a lot of, I don't want to say controversy, but conflict of how the funds could be used, specifically with regard to some town council rulings and stuff like that. So a couple years ago, we brought it back to town meeting and had the funds, we had that article rescinded, and the funds were put into our administrative fund for the same use, but a broader sort of category. Not just tax title research, it was sort of a little bit more forgiving, okay? Obviously, the funds can't be used for research unless it falls, the project or what's going to be researched would fall under a CPA authorized use. So, for example, it would have to be tax title research for a parcel of land that would be eligible for open space conservation preservation, or perhaps affordable housing, whatever. So that was actually about 2 years ago, and the funds still have not been expended. Now, the place where that starts, okay, is Real Estate and Open Space Committee. We are charged with researching owners unknown properties in specific. We've had things before the Board of Selectmen, for whatever reason, they've been stalled. Anyway, I finally, on Monday night, got the go-ahead to use some of those funds.
From who?
What?
From who?
The Board of Selectmen. So I went to the Board of Selectmen as the Real Estate and Open Space Chair back in November, put in a request for a specific parcel, and they put it on hold, and they brought me in Monday night, and they had another discussion, and I was really just looking for a vote of support to move forward to this committee to get a release of the funds, so that we could start the process. And they finally gave it the go-ahead. So I would like to, and if it's something I need to do next month, under an agenda item, get a certain amount released so that we could have the town administrator do an RFP to get a person going to do some of the research. The parcel in particular, we have identified a parcel that is of utmost priority to our committee and to Conservation Commission, and as well to the Board of Selectmen. So that's what I'm looking for. I have to say, in this committee, once we had that money transferred under the administrative fund, we discussed very, very briefly that we would need to come up with sort of a procedure,
Guideline.
and we never did.
I remember when that
Yeah.
discussion.
So the funding has been there, and this is some of the other parcels that would probably come up like down the road that we would use some of this funding for, are some of the parcels that were on the tax lien auction list that came out last summer, that Conservation and Real Estate together worked on, and we pulled some of the parcels off the list because they might be of great value to preserve because of their location. They abut, water department land or other town-owned conservation land, et cetera. So that's where some of those might come from. We're also been talking to the water department and identified parcels that they may be interested in, and they're a different entity. And I did have a discussion with the Board of Selectmen about the fact that if it wasn't identified as a CPA for purpose, then ultimately the funds would have to be refunded back to us if it ultimately wasn't used for a purpose like that. So.
All right, you've made the presentation. Can we have a discussion for argument over that? Or-
Absolutely. Yeah, we can certainly discuss.
Okay. Any discussion? On that one, I wouldn't know where to start. Jim?
Well, I'll start with two questions.
Mhm.
One is, can you identify the piece of property? And two is, do you have an estimate of the cost for the title research?
I met with the Board of Selectmen in executive session.
Okay.
So at this time, I'm not going to release the parcel location. But I will do some further questioning as to whether, it's been out there in some other places, like another agenda or something like that. Second, we don't have an estimate, but what I would be looking for is some kind of a capped amount to start with, because we certainly don't want, some of these parcels are so mired in, you could expend $50,000 on on a particular parcel, and we wouldn't want to do that. So we would want to set a cap, you know, of 5,000 or 7,000 or something like that. That's at least what I would, you know, perceive, you know, for some research. Actually, the town administrator is has a meeting actually tomorrow with someone who's gonna do research on another parcel, not something that's funded through us. And they would have a better idea of hours, you know, equal to amount, you know, which I can bring back to us. I mean, you know, this has been sitting for so long, I mean.
Mary?
I would just think every parcel is gonna be so different based on,
You're right.
based on its ownership, so it's hard to estimate.
Very hard.
It's really hard to estimate that stuff, and ultimately, it depends on what your end goal for it is, whether your end goal is eminent domain, your end goal is a tax taking, and, so that's kind of hard to guess.
Right.
So, but certainly,
We have
you
to
know,
start someplace,
Yeah.
though, is the thing.
and certainly to Joe's point, you know, I think we're probably gonna have to confirm it at the next meeting anyway, but, you know, if there are good parcels that we should go after, can I ask a point of information through you to Joe?
Go ahead.
Is that something, not for this meeting, I think we could certainly wait for it for next meeting. Would that rise to the level of something that we could meet in executive session over
That was,
and calendar? I think we could,
I
But
think,
I'm
I think we would have to,
correct.
Okay.
given your meeting with the Board of Selectmen, because
Okay.
if their minutes can't be released because it defeats the purpose, we would need to be under that.
Same thing.
Any board and committee can use executive session. We would use the same clause reason that the selectmen
Right.
did. And I would argue that we should do that.
okay, so can we all agree on that? And is
So
there any more
the-
discussion?
I think the point is we would agenda it as an executive session
Session.
meeting with a specific time, just like the Board of Selectmen did.
Okay. Jim?
Kathy, you may not know the answer to this question, but is Chris thinking about, sort of interviewing and hiring outside counsel to do title work on like a work order contract?
I think so.
Okay, because 2 years ago, the town planner and I met with Chris. We interviewed 3 different law firms to do exactly that thing, and it went no place.
Right, but I think they're taking a
Why
different
don't
approach.
why don't we hold the rest of this discussion, because I don't know where it's really gonna go,
Right.
until we have that executive
All right,
session.
and I'll
Okay,
come
moment.
back
that's
with a
fine,
little bit,
David.
Okay,
I'll have some more specifics.
Yeah,
Well, I think too, if we're meeting in executive session, you can, then you're free to tell us.
Yeah.
And the minutes are,
But,
Found.
if I can add on to that, though. So the discussion we've just had, first and foremost struck me as procedure as to, and stop me if I'm wrong, but does this committee want to establish an administrative procedure for use of those funds for similar type actions? So we could make that an agenda item that would be an open session. The executive session discussion would be to a particular parcel or matter. So we could do both. We can build the program that you're looking for and then put it into use for a specific parcel.
hold that thought for a moment. Jen, did you get that? Okay.
I could repeat that, believe it or
No,
not. That much I knew that was in there.
nice job.
Okay. Kathy?
Well, but if we did that, I mean, we would want to have executive session first, though. We would want to have the discussion.
Yeah.
So is it,
If you think that's helpful for what you're looking for. Meaning, we've had a general discussion.
well, I do think it's helpful. I think it's necessary. I think it's necessary.
Which?
I
The
think it's
general
necess-
session discussion? Or
Yes,
the,
yes, the general session
That first.
discussion of
so it's clear.
procedure. So is
Yeah,
there a
'cause it's a
way
g-
to have executive session after?
yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, basically, yeah. I know here the Board of Selectmen do executive session prior to the meeting. With
Most do,
every
yeah.
other government entity that I've been with, and I've been with quite a few, they always did executive session at the end of the meeting.
oh, okay.
But in doing that, they needed to announce whether or not they would be going back into open session after executive session.
So the only change to that, you're spot on, is that now we must say that we are coming out of executive session only for the purpose of adjourning.
Only
Okay.
That's the new
purpose of
change,
adjournment.
but you're absolutely right.
Okay.
Yep.
So do they have to list on the agenda a specific time, or can it be at the
No.
conclusion of the regular session?
It can be at the
Going
conclu-
into executive session?
Our town clerk.
Yeah.
Prefers time.
Okay,
That's what we've been instructed to do.
okay, so,
So-
But you cannot put a time on if it's going to be at the end of the meeting,
Correct.
if it's at the end of the agenda.
I think to the point,
Wow.
as long as it's no
You
earlier
guys go
than,
fight with her.
as long as it's no earlier than 6, if our meeting is 6 o'clock, as long as we say no earlier than 6 PM on such and such a date, and it is agenda, the last agenda item is executive session, then I don't think you have a
Yeah,
problem.
because the
Correct.
executive session, you don't have anybody in the room except the members
Exactly.
of the committee.
Exactly.
So the rationale, my understanding, and what we do in the planning board, when we put a time on, like not before, is because there is public participation,
Mhm.
and we want to notify the public as to when that participation would occur.
Mhm.
Executive session is something completely different because
Exactly.
it's only the members of the committee.
All right, so if we go through our agenda, whatever we say our agenda is, at the very end, we have this discussion in the public meeting, we start it, then we go into, we announce executive session, and then don't we have to come back to a public session in order to close the
and you
meeting?
just said
That's
that.
what
So
Joe just
that's,
said.
all right, I'm
Yeah.
just following the
Yeah.
bouncing
Yeah,
ball
so,
now.
Mr. Chairman, what you would do is at that point in time, you would announce that the committee is going to go into executive session for the purpose of, and it'll be written out, it's a clause in the open meeting law, whereby you've made a determination that a public discussion would negatively impact the town's legal position. So we're going to executive session, you do a roll call vote of all the members. Once a majority has voted to go in, you clear the room, you're in
That's what I'm
executive.
saying.
Yep, and then at the end, you,
That's our motion.
Got it.
yep, before we go in, you'd say, we're coming out only for the
Don't lose
purpose of
that.
adjournment.
No, it's just in the procedure
Right.
standards.
Okay,
But that's what, but she's always been very definite that it had to have a time. So according to y'all, no time.
that's all right,
So
So-
somebody
no problem.
not have me
So,
yell.
under the agenda, because I know where Jan's coming from here, I know your concern. Would we post on our agenda, regular session, 6 PM, and then would we put executive session at end of meeting? Would we put that in the header of the,
No, we would just
In the
put
agenda.
the
It's agenda.
agenda, and the executive session would be the last item on
The
Agenda
very
number,
last item.
agenda item number 12 could say executive session.
Right.
executive session, and.
For the purpose of
For the
discussing
purpose of
X.
Right.
I always posted for real estate and open space, like, first, executive session.
Do you
and
have to
then
discuss
regular
what?
session And time.
In the agenda, I have to say what the executive session is.
Go
Well,
ahead, Mary.
it would be
Mary.
the same type of statement
Like the
that David
motion.
would make.
Which is what I just showed you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Right, you
We would
can put that
probably-
on the agenda, yes.
Right.
And we probably borrow liberally from the last selectmen's meeting,
Exactly.
and the way in which they,
Right.
the manner in which they worded it.
Exactly, and I can get that for you.
Okay.
Don't get it for her again.
And to Jim's point, my experience is the same. I've never seen an executive session be at the beginning of a meeting.
Oh, really?
They've always been at the
All
end.
mine are.
Really? Ours
Yeah,
are-
Well,
the
that's
selectmen, they're
because
always the
Ours
first.
aren't. I guess
right.
maybe
Yeah,
that's the
that's because the
difference.
I can honestly say, I've only
Right.
seen that in
Ours have
Harwich.
usually been
Right.
right at
Really?
the beginning.
And,
I didn't know
yeah,
that. I was just following what everybody else did.
Right.
No, I've worked for 4 government agencies in Boston, and
and
all of
multiple
their boards have
communities,
the
and
executive session at
always
the
do.
end.
Okay, just as long as the devil's in the details again.
Yep.
I want to
Absolutely.
get called on it, so,
We'll get you there, sir.
thank you, sir. All right, is there anything else? Jan? One thing I should
Thought there was, but, oh,
inform the
yeah,
board.
yeah.
Before you jump, I've tasked
There it
Jan
was.
with putting together all the documentation since Bob turned in all the information that he had from the time I took this chair until the time I leave this chair. I want an organized binder of the historical information. So Jan's doing that, and there's a lot of work involved. So I just want to let the board know that's happening. Go ahead.
And I forgot I was gonna ask you this. Bob is a Yankee, and he used old binders. And I was just wondering, these big, huge, because this year's is like a 4-inch binder size, which I don't happen to have, and I went down and they're really dear in price. I was just wondering, did anybody have maybe old binders that they wanted to dispose of?
I'll check.
Well, that'd be grand. Okay,
All right, is there anything else?
yes.
Go ahead, you have the floor.
Just FYI, after all the money that the CPC spent, the Meeting House has their grand opening next week on the 17th and 18th, and they're doing a benefit concert with the Chatham Chorale.
It's Celtic music.
Bagpipes and Celtic music.
Well,
The
that's
tickets
timely.
are $35, but if they're, so this is their grand opening, so I can't believe
Well,
we
there's actually
haven't.
gonna be another opening in May.
Oh, okay.
Just read it in the paper today.
Because usually, I mean, she's so good with all her documentations, I'm
This
surprised
is,
that.
you know, the Chatham Chorale has helped them out before. They've done, you know, in partnership, these fundraisers. And so this is sort of like, you might call
Well,
it a
it's a
soft
benefit.
opening.
Right, I mean, it's a benefit concert,
Right.
split, I imagine, split between the two
Chatham Chorale and the Meeting House,
organizations.
correct. But they are
I
having
thought that
a
was.
another public open house in May, where the public will be invited to go through and look at, in amazement at the chandelier and the organ and the mural